Very excited to have Minnesota State Senator Rob Kupec here. And we are at least familiar with one another. Haven't done a whole lot of talking face to face, but we have similar backgrounds. I'm a former sports director locally, and you still are a meteorologist. We're on TV, but not so much anymore. So this might be a first where a retired sports director sits down for a hard-hitting interview with a meteorologist. We could be making history here.
Right. We're the news guys in this whole thing, right? We're the reason they all watch local TV, right? The weather and local sports. Absolutely.
I'm finding that, I'll be honest with you, we used to have consultants that would come to town and give us tips, and sports was not the thing that they focused on, And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. We work hard. We do all of this stuff. And now that I've been out of TV for 15 years, you know what I watch for? The weather.
The weather.
It's just the weather. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I think I get it.
It is the weather. But it was also, if you were at that high school game,
yeah,
grandma and grandpa at least, and the parents, they're all going to watch to see the highlights, or their kid or whatever, grandchild on that. So yeah, there was that also was a big driver of viewership for sure.
But now I'm seeing a couple local channels and even some in the Twin Cities where you spend a lot of time don't have sports departments anymore.
They don't. And I remember that trend started a while ago. I remember there was a station in, I think it was St. Louis, where they're like, you have to justify sports tonight.
Yeah.
Or you don't get any time.
Yeah. No, there's stations here in the Red River Valley that go all out for Friday Night Football, and some are just nothing. So, right. I mean, the industry obviously has changed a lot since you and I were on TV. But tell me a little bit about your background. Very integrated in the area here, but you didn't originally come from here. You were more of an East Coast guy?
Yeah, originally I'm from Connecticut. I grew up there, and I gotta always preface this, because when people think of Connecticut, I think they think of who's the boss of that Gold Coast suburb of New York City. And I was in the eastern part of the state, very rural part of the state. We had chicken farms around us, and it was an old mill town. That had seen better days. So that's the part of Connecticut that I grew up in. So not maybe what pops into your brain when you think of Connecticut, but there. And then I knew at a very young age I wanted to be a meteorologist, second grade, and so looked for a school to go do that at. Went to the State University of New York at Albany. I kind of wanted to go into television, and that was probably not a great choice for a school to go in for television. It was a research university, so I got a good background on meteorology there, but not a great television station. I interned at a TV station there, and then met my future wife in college, so kind of put my career on hold. She was working on a PhD, and she said, eventually she went on the job market, and we said, we're not really going to move any further west than Minnesota. And so by 9 blocks, she was true to her word, landed at MSUM, and that's what, brought us to Moorhead in 2000. Stayed at home for a couple of years with my kid as a stay-at-home dad, and then, my wife said, hey, maybe you ought to get a job. And I said, I'm going to be a TV meteorologist. And she's like, really? Because you haven't really ever done that. And I said, I got a plan. And so sure enough, I took a couple of communications classes at MSUM and met people, and then away I went. WDAY for 10 years, and then KVRR for 10 after that.
Okay, so you were in about the same length I was. I was about 18, 19 years. So
yep.
One of the things I have to ask is, I saw this a lot during TV, but I think the weather department's probably got it a little bit more, is comments from viewers, phone calls, emails, things like that. Did you get hammered with those, and did it depend on what was going on, obviously?
Yes, and surprisingly, it sets you up pretty well to go into politics. Some of the criticism you get, you would not think it as a weather person, but there were, and obviously, the most criticism comments you ever got were when you had to interrupt programming.
Yeah. Yep.
And I tried to do it with a very light hand. Some of it always depended what you were cutting into. If it was a live sports event, I really tried all right, I'm going to try to wait to a commercial break, but you don't know when those are coming in a live sports event. If it was a rerun of Family Feud, I really didn't have a problem. We're going, it's a tornado. We're going on right now. So, but those were always the ones that were people would get really angry about. And I'm I'm really trying to keep it to the minimum amount I can.
Yeah. What about comments from the ag community. Did you get that much, or did you know? I mean, I know a lot of people would call and say, I live next door to a current meteorologist as well, so we still talk. And, I have to drive to so-and-so at this time of day on Sunday. Should I go?
Sure. Yes.
There's a lot of
those.
But what about...
Should I hay this weekend, right? Should
Right.
I bring in the hay? And and I always felt, and this is... when you're making a forecast, and somebody has some weekend plans, you don't want to make it right. But when you're doing it for the ag people, like there's money on the line in what you're going to tell them. So it was always like, oh, this is much more serious. But yes, you would get those calls. I think as technology got better and there's more options, I think, for the ag community to find weather on their phone and hook into more of those, I think they started to dwindle off. But you would regularly get those calls. My one funny one would always be like the fall. It would be a beautiful, say it's going to be 75 this weekend, and the anchors would like, wow, this looks like a really great weekend. And I always knew, like, unless you're piling sugar beets, because it needs to be 57 degrees or less, and they're not going to be happy.
Sure.
Because as soon as you said it's going to be a great weekend, you knew there'd be an email in your box saying, not so much for us.
Yeah. So you got out of TV. Tell me the year again.
2022.
Okay, but you kind of went into the ag industry, right? And are still dabbling in that, I guess, a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I left to run for office, and I knew, rightfully so, should not be on the air running for that. And I said, well, I'll find another job. And before I even got to the election, another job kind of landed in my lap. Okay. So it's with a crop insurance company. I do some weekly forecasts, some data analysis, go around to some of their, when they have conventions with farmers and, planning for the next year, we'll do some of those talks too. Mm-hmm.
How did politics even enter the picture? I mean, I know as I get older, I'm a lot more interested in what's going on. 25 years ago, didn't really pay much attention to it. So what triggered it for you?
I've always had an interest in politics. I mean, always, in some kind of public service and in just policy in general. And obviously when you're on television, you're somewhat limited, to what you can do in politics. And, and I went to, a couple like county conventions. I'm like, that's probably the limit of my activity that I can do. And then when the seat opened up and I'm a Democrat, it was 2022. And a lot of people thought, oh, you're going to get your clocks clean midterm election. And the state senator at the time kind of backed out late, and nobody was like stepping up to run. And so some people approached me, hey, we know you've been around, done some things behind the scenes. You have some name recognition. Would you think about running for office?
What was that like? What was a campaign like? Was it stressful knowing, okay, I'm going to spend some money, obviously, I have to raise some money, and if I don't get it, I mean, at least you had something to fall back on.
I did. Yeah, that's what I'm like, look, I'm going to take a shot. I've thought about doing this for a long time, and the opportunity arose. And if I miss, I'm content to be a meteorologist. I will also say that our television station was up for sale at the time.
Oh.
And so if that had not been up for sale, I was like, I'm probably pretty happy here, and I don't think I want to do that. But I didn't know if I wanted to go through that and who they would end up selling it to. So I'm like, well, let's try this.
Yeah. So you're elected in 2022?
Yes.
Okay. So I've always, or at least more recently, been fascinated by how all of this works. At what point do you start to get comfortable as your role as a Minnesota state senator, knowing, getting familiar with committees, with votes, with where you need to be, when, how it all works? I mean, when do you get a comfort level, or don't you?
I don't know that I ever get to that comfort level, because every time you think you've got it figured out, something has changed. Sure. The first year you're there and it's a budget year, and you're dealing with a budget. The next year is a policy year and it's shorter, and so the runway to get things done is shorter, and so suddenly that's changed. And then the following year, the makeup of the House has completely changed, so that changes the strategy of how you're going to get anything done. So it's always a little bit in flux. But I will, the other thing people always ask is like, well, how do you write a bill? And you're like, you come with an idea and you go to this nonpartisan staff and you say, here's what I'd like to do, here's what I'd like you to accomplish. And they put it all into the legalese of a bill. So we have a wonderful nonpartisan legal and fiscal staff that does all that work for you.
So one of the committees you're on is the Ag Committee, Vice Chair, still correct?
Yes.
How do you get on committees? How do they either get assigned, and how do you get the position of Vice Chair?
Sure, and here's one thing I think when I look back, like strategically, I did a poor job of picking my committees. So basically, you get asked like, what committees would you like to be on? And I immediately, Ag was my number one. Higher ed was number two. There's 3 colleges within my district. I picked labor, and then further down the list, I had health and human services, but I ended up on health and human services, which takes up majority of my time.
Okay.
The Ag Committee, and I think a lot of people look at this as prestige and power. The Ag Committee controls very little of the state budget. We have and it's funny because Ag has such a huge impact in Minnesota to the overall economy, but the state budget for Ag is relatively small. Not a lot of people were banging down the door to get on the Ag Committee, but I thought also with my background in meteorology, I said, it was a good fit for me too.
Mm-hmm. So you look at the state of Minnesota, Ag has got to be a big economic generator for the state, but then you look at the population, you've got almost all the population centered in the Twin Cities area. The population where the district that you represent, Moorhead's the biggest city, right at 45,000, give or take, and after that it's down to a couple towns of 20 and 10,000. So population's not great, but the Ag community is very large in the area that you represent.
Right, and it's funny because my district size-wise for a greater Minnesota district is relatively small because of Moorhead being half the district. But, Ag is, I think about this, we are all the cities across Minnesota, even the Twin Cities, they're all here because of Ag. I mean, Minneapolis was there because it was the milling capital for a time of the world.
Right.
So all of those places were all basically in some support role of agriculture really within the state for most of it. Maybe up north where they're doing timber, maybe not, but it is all an Ag support state. So it's super important to our economy.
You said you heard from farmers a lot when you were on TV and weather. What's it like now?
On the Ag Committee, we do hear from them a lot. I would say in my day-to-day email inbag, not a ton of stuff comes in from farmers. And I think some of that is that the national farm bill has much more of an impact on them, less than the state. And I will say our Ag Committee probably could argue it's probably the most bipartisan committee within the Senate. There is a lot of agreement on what direction we are heading within the agricultural community. So I don't think there's a lot of farmers that are upset. I mean, the biggest thing I probably hear from farmers in my district is about property taxes.
Okay.
And it's some of it is the uniqueness of Clay County having Moorhead in it as opposed to our neighbors that don't. And so the property taxes run a little high, and it is, they get taxed on the value of that land, not so much on like the productivity of that land, and obviously land prices have gone up, and that has a huge impact on their property taxes.
So you said, this was one of my questions that I had. You said the impact that the Ag Committee has is probably smaller because of what's going on at the national level. So what we hear about all of the national stuff, and we can talk about that in a second. But so what sort of things can you do when so much is dictated at the national level?
Sure. I think, where I really think our Ag Committee shines is on a lot of research things, and particularly in conjunction with the University of Minnesota. I think it is finding new opportunities, new markets for our farmers, and new ways to bring, whatever their commodity to market in some new way, shape, or form. I think we've done a really good job on that. So I think that's a huge part. Obviously we're a huge turkey producing state too. We've done a really good job of being inventive and creative on fighting bird flu. And making sure that our poultry industry, can weather that and has the resources to do that. So I think that's a big thing. And also just finding those areas where, farmers are really good stewards of the land, and finding those ways where we can incentivize farmers, to do more, to be that, better use of the land, and in terms of for an environmental purpose. And I think we've done a really good job on a lot of those fronts.
Let's talk the federal level, like we mentioned earlier. We hear this from farmers. One of the big topics is tariffs. How much of an impact are you hearing that those have on the farming community in your area and around the state?
Sure. A lot of farmers, and I think their big concern, and obviously there's a direct short impact here too, but I think their bigger concern is the long-term impact of those tariffs, that because those tariffs have gone up, the people that they've normally sold those, soybeans to in particular, that they've looked to other markets now. And that's a hard, thing to get back, is to get that market share back. I always remember I worked in a restaurant in college, and they used to have a sign up, I came in and, you treated me poorly. I trained back. Your service wasn't good. It was like I gave you 3 times and then I left. And you're not going to get,
Right.
So if you've got them already, you got to treat them right. And once you have them in the door, and then you keep them, they'll keep coming back. And it's the same way, with the ag markets. If if China has developed relationships with South American countries, those will be in place. And then they'll be questioning whether the United States is a good partner to buy soybeans from, and so that's a knock on us. So I think a lot of farmers are worried about that long term, and obviously it comes at a terrible time in the ag economy, right? Commodity prices are not great. Land prices are extremely high. So if you're trying to bust into this business too, it is not easy to do. And then you get hit with these tariffs. It's like a double whammy.
Can you at the state level find other export opportunities? We hear a lot of delegations going to different countries, especially the Chinas, and somewhere in Asia. Can you do that at the state level? Find other exports for local farmers?
You can to some extent, but you are just a state, and you are somewhat limited. And I think our ag team has been marketing on that, and then also trying to find here, maybe do a little less of soybeans or corn this year, and here's a new crop that maybe can be something else, a niche crop, something like that you can get a higher value from. So I think we've been really good at trying to develop that and move in that direction.
So in order to support the farmers at the federal level, President Trump announced $12.5 billion dollar support or a bailout for farmers. It seems to be that a lot of this is because some of the policies too. What are you hearing for farmers? A lot that we've heard is well, that's great, but that's not what we want, type of thing. And again, it's long term. It's probably not going to help. But what do you hear?
I hear exact same thing, and I think a lot of farmers are much more free market people. We want to take what we grow, and we want to be able to sell that product out on the open market around the world. We are not. I think they're appreciative of the little bit of help that they're also that's probably not enough, because just the way the farm economy works, that it's not going to be enough to certainly sustain them long term, and maybe even short term, it's not enough for them. So I think it is that long term concern about where are we going to go if we've lost that market. And I know one advantage we have in Minnesota, because a lot of it, North Dakota, puts a lot of their stuff on train cars, and it ships to the Pacific Northwest and goes to China. And we do have in Minnesota sending things down the Mississippi to other markets that maybe we can move out through different ports. We do have access to that. So we're a little bit more nimble than our friends to the west, but certainly you get up into my part of Minnesota, and we're much more tied in with that rail to the Pacific Northwest.
Sure. One of the other issues, I think hot button issues, or at least maybe an issue that people thought would happen, is the immigration policies were going to affect laborers on farms. It wasn't that long ago that I was a college student here in town, and you would see the migrant workers come up. Has the current immigration policies affected farm labor or farm production?
At the moment, the big push that's going on now, we're in the winter, so there aren't as many up here. Where we're seeing it more is on the production side, in those processing plants, turkey processing plants, meat processing plants. Certainly, there's a lot of people not showing up for work. There's a lot of fear there. I think also, when I have talked to farmers, I think they would like to have some kind of solid immigration policy, a better policy about work visas coming in, or a path into citizenship, for the United States. And I think we'd all agree on that. We're kind of, our birth rate has declined. We're short on labor. It would be nice to have, a good, stable labor pool to come in. I think that's the thing they're looking for. And I think the other thing they talk about is I thought you were going to be going after, criminals and people that had committed crime. And I know, I know some, maybe they're here legally on worker visa or undocumented. Maybe they're here undercover, but those are like, they're just good hard workers. Those aren't the people that are committing crime. So, and I think there's been some realization on that. And the other thing I think you have to worry about is, say you are in one of these other countries and you're looking for like one of those visas to come in and do farm work. With everything that's going on, you're like, you know what? I think I'm going to take a pass on the United States. Maybe you go somewhere else and you find some other labor opportunity. So I think there's also a fear because even if you're, there have been plenty of stories now where people who are even U.S. citizens that have been getting rounded up and maybe they get released, but it's not been a pleasant situation that they've gone through for a day. And I don't think people want to deal with that.
Yeah. So all of these things that we've talked about affect prices. The price that you and I pay when we go to the grocery store. So can you kind of explain why some of the prices of different things are so all over the board? Right now, beef is out of control, and we hear, the prices are going down. They're going down very quickly. Well, eggs are still, that used to be the big one, especially during COVID and then bird flu. But certain things, gas is relatively cheap. It's very cheap. And all of a sudden we're paying £10 or $10 a pound for beef. And so it's just all over the map. And can you put your finger on or explain why?
A lot of these things, the egg thing was tied into bird flu.
Sure.
So a lot of that, we've gotten that a little bit under control. So they've come down. I will say on the beef side, there's a little bit of a shortage. It's supply and demand. And so there isn't the supply that there is. And it is, in my job for the crop insurance company, I go out to Western North Dakota and I do a lot of things with ranchers.
Sure.
The upside is that is the shining star right now of our ag market is if you're in beef and even in Minnesota, we've seen some other people, maybe when they're in dairy, which is a terrible state. And they'll shift more towards the beef market, and that's sustaining their farm because the price, is so much more there. Yeah, if I knew exactly what this was, I think I'd be in a different position and be making a lot more money.
True.
If I could figure that all out. But yeah, and gas is it's like $50 a barrel right now, and locally we have a little bit of a gas war going on. There's been a new convenience store that's moved into town. It's almost $1 a gallon less in the Fargo Moorhead area than it is down in the Twin Cities.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It's a huge price difference. I know. I fueled up for under $2 the other day.
Yeah.
On some E88 stuff, which is an area that I've also worked a lot in. But and I showed that price to people down there. They're like, "What's going on up in your area?"
Yeah. Well, talk about E88 a little bit and explain what you've been working on and how that can maybe help producers.
Sure. Yeah. So for ethanol and biofuel, so it's 15%, ethanol within that 88 octane. And I have had some bills to try to get more of it out. Minnesota is one of the leaders in terms of the number of stations, but I've had bills. One thing is you have to get some new tanks in the ground. So we've had bills to give a little monetary support to gas stations that want to go and convert over to E88 just to try to get more of it out into the marketplace. And we're trying to make it too so that, there are some regulations on when you can sell that to make it more year round. The other side of that is sustainable aviation fuel, which there is plans to build a plant in Moorhead for sustainable aviation fuel, and you could lower the cost or the emissions from jets by 50%. That is a huge polluter, a huge creator of greenhouse gases, and batteries on planes aren't really a good thing because batteries are heavy and you want planes to be light. So if we can use that, so to me, this is like one of those super win-win situations I look for. So you're taking, you're giving farmers a new market and it's mostly like corn stover that they would be looking at. So you're giving them a new market, you're creating jobs, a better tax base, and then also, creating something that's going to help the environment. And luckily we're attached to a very large airport down in the Twin Cities that all of those things coming together, I think are a super win-win. And it is, that's one more way to help farmers with the commodity prices low. Here's another option.
Right. So as we record this, you're about a month away from the next session, heading back down to St. Paul. do you have any ideas or what's coming up with this session? What are some of the topics that you'll be attacking? Obviously, there's a lot going on in Minnesota, and we don't need to get in all of that. But from the ag standpoint, what sort of things are on the table?
Yeah, so we do a biennium budget in Minnesota. So this is not a budget year. Last year we did a budget. We're under that 2-year budget now. So this technically is a policy year. And we had a meeting with the ag commissioner last week, talking about there's always some little policy tweaks we want to make. One of the things, one of the bills that I really worked on was a grain indemnity fund, which all of our neighbors have. So when the farmer brings their crop to the elevator, there's a weird little period there where they've got the crop, but they haven't been paid for it, and we see elevators go bust. And maybe in 5 years, a farmer can get pennies on the dollar out of a bankruptcy court, but that's not the way the farm economy works. In North Dakota, Iowa, Wisconsin, they all have some kind of, basically an insurance fund that says, okay, we'll pay you out, and then we'll worry about collecting on the bankruptcy. And so we did not have that in Minnesota. And so we created that. And we just had the first use of that grain indemnity fund, an elevator. It's a company out of Omaha, but they've got interests over like in the Duluth area. And so they went under. And so this is the first time we're using it. And we know the ag commissioner said, so as we're using it, we realize there could be a few clarifying points in here that would streamline the process. So there'll probably be some tweaks we need to make on that, just on the, coming out. And I think we need to look at a lot of what we do at the state level is tied to federal dollars. And so we're partners on these things, and we want to make sure that whatever those programs are, we are, or are, what if we've lost federal dollars there, because we don't know. They've just said we're putting a freeze on everything in Minnesota. Well, our lab that does like testing for bird flu, suddenly the feds were not paying for those tests, and we're in the middle of this. And by the way, all our neighbors, because we make so many turkeys, all our neighbors around us are like, we want Minnesota to test for that because we don't want it coming here.
Yeah.
And so luckily they've restored that funding there. But those are all areas that I think, even though that's a budget thing, we're going to need to be looking at and concerned with.
So speaking of the national level, how, in your district, relatively small in terms of population and area, but how much do you have your ear to the ground at what's coming up at the federal level? And because obviously that's going to affect a lot of farmers around here. So do you have anything in your crystal ball as to what's coming up in the next, or what's at least on the table in the next couple of months?
I will say it's very hard to tell. It changes daily, hourly, sometimes whim to whim, what comes out of Washington. I think the most troubling part was, our ag commissioner in Minnesota he's such an upbeat guy, and he travels the state so much. He is so out there and visiting farms. And I think the thing that was troubling last week when I had, what the meeting with him was he's like, I've never had a moment where I'm like, I'm not sure what this means. And I call somebody at the federal level and like nobody returns my call. He's not getting those answers. So some of it is we're just not quite sure what's coming down. So it's you're a little bit kind of fumbling in the dark to figure out where you should go.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the bailout, if you, for lack of a better word, the $12.5 or $12 billion? What does that mean to an individual farmer in your area? I mean, how much are they getting? When do they get that? How does that all work?
I'm not even sure how that all, it's coming. How that all exactly will be broken down. I'd imagine that it has to do something with how much sales you had, or I mean, they're not just going to
make it even,
dole it even, and it shouldn't be, because if you're producing less or producing more, it would have an impact. I mean, and this has just been, in our area, sugar beets have always been and then this year was not a good year for sugar beets, and there's a lot of pressures right now on the sugar industry too. So that's always been our saving grace, is that we can weather some of this other stuff because we have sugar beets, and then this was kind of the whammy year where we don't have the sugar beets thing too. Yeah, I am not even sure how exactly that works, how they're going to get that money, how it's going to be distributed,
or when.
And it is a lot of, and that is, I think, when you're in farming, I mean, farming has a lot of uncertainties, but if you're in business, you want some kind of certainty, like, okay, this isn't going to be good, but I know how it's going and where it's heading. And obviously farming is dependent, on the weather a lot, which, even though I try my best to make a forecast, you can't always depend on that. And to have just all of this, uncertainty is very hard to do when you're even at the state level trying to navigate where we're going with this.
Yeah. So in your district, I think we've talked about this, you have just a couple of population areas, Moorhead, Detroit Lakes, Hawley, Barnesville. I mean, we're talking about some towns only a couple thousand people. But in terms of area, a lot of farmers. So when you represent that whole group, there's got to be a lot of different priorities for different people, the people that live in the city of Moorhead and others. How do you balance that as to trying to create or move policy at the state level when there's so many different things going on with people in your district?
Sure. And it is at times, it is challenging at times too. And I think, there's certainly across the district, even though it is small, there's a very different, political views within that. And, trying to walk, a line to try to help everybody. I mean, first of all, no matter where you are, where you live, you should be able to reach out if you have a problem and solve that. Because a lot of things we do are not particularly super partisan issues.
Right.
There's a lot of work we do that's very bipartisan. It's just like, oh, this could be better. Let's do some policy here, or here's maybe an area we need to spend a little money. Let's do that. So it's not as complicated as you think. And it's funny, the farming side, and this is, the technology is so every year fewer and fewer people are in the farming business, but we're farming land. So over the last 10 to 15 years, I think the numbers I saw is like half the farmers in my district went away.
Wow.
It's, still a lot of acres being farmed. It's not that it's not being farmed, but maybe there's somebody just living on it and they're renting the land out. But the actual people that are doing it are far fewer than they used to be.
Mm-hmm. And that's attributed to what? Just the cost for the most part? I mean,
the cost and the fact that, with technology, you can go and you can do a lot more land with a lot fewer people.
Yeah.
And those are the opportunities. It's funny because, when the Ag Committee, we tour around the state, and when they come up, the first time that the chair of the Ag Committee came up here, and he'd been visiting a lot of farms in southern Minnesota, it's like 1,500, 2,000 acres. And they come up to the Red River Valley, and it's like 6,000 acre farms, and they're just like blown away by the size and scale of what we're doing up here.
Yeah.
So
you're coming up on 3 years since you were elected. How's it been? Is it what you thought, or is it completely different? Do you enjoy it?
I do enjoy it. I do. And some of this is, and you would maybe understand this, and some of it's like doing the weather. It's a different thing every day.
Sure.
And I find that mix, it doesn't get monotonous by any means. Because, today, I'm working on one thing today, and tomorrow I'm working on childcare, and then I'm working on an ag issue, and it's interesting finding those places where they all, kind of overlap are always interesting. I would say the surprising thing, I think, was even as a freshman, and I don't think it was always this way, the ability I had to just move legislation. Like, yes, there wasn't like a big seniority pecking order in terms of like what you could do. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a refreshing, like, oh, this is not exactly how I thought I'd have to go. You got to wait your turn, and you're the new guy. And, no, you had, the ability to move that. So I thought that was really refreshing.
Yeah. You keep doing it?
Yeah. I think for a little bit longer. I'm not going to be there forever.
Yeah.
And I don't think a politician should. I think you could do a few years. I mean, some of it is just getting a little like I'm kind of figuring out how this all works now, and I have a much better grasp on it. And I think, but you should not be there forever. Somebody new with better ideas, more energy, or whatever can come in. So I do not. I do not expect to be like wheeled out of there in a chair. Like I also want to retire at some point. I'm like, sure. I have things I'd like to do with my wife, and places I'd like to go and see, and whatever. So I'm not going to be there forever. But no, it is at the moment very enjoyable. And and some of the things you work on are very abstract and not. But it's those moments when you actually, like, somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I just want you to know you worked on this bill, and this, did something to me. Even the grain indemnity fund, which to me is like the wonkiest thing in the world, right? Some little organic farmer south of Moorhead came up and said, I just want you to know how much that means to us, because it is a lot of those are the really small farmers, and particularly in the organic area, those elevators have been some of the ones that have gone bankrupt, and so they're like, that really means a lot to me. Or when I was out, when I was out door knocking. It was rural Clay County, and I went down this long driveway. Sometimes you go down a long driveway, you don't know what you're going to find at the end of that long driveway. But it was this couple and their daughter. She was just 18, and she needs a hearing aid to function. And turns out with hearing aids at 18, your insurance coverage goes away. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, because I mean, even, your kids can stay on your insurance till they're 26.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, why would that not at least be for hearing aids? And they were all worried because their kid was about to go to college. Like, if what happens to her hearing aid, if it breaks, we don't have the money to do that. And so, and I went in, so I was like, I'm going to run a bill that says least extended to 26. Well, somebody else had a bill like, we're just going to cover hearing aids. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a better bill. Let's do that. If we have them, let's go with that. And, the end of that session, when we passed that bill, I saved that phone number, and I called them up and I said, hey, just want you to know, we just passed this. And the relief that came through on the other end of that phone line just felt really good.
Yeah.
So,
well, good. Keep in touch.
Yeah, we'll do.
Have you on After Hours Ag podcast again.
Okay, sounds
All
great.
Right, thanks, Rob.
Scott.
Appreciate it.